So I think we can begin. And um, today's session is a special session. I'm the facilitator of discussion, and I'm eager to know what people think about the Curiosity Shop, the old Curiosity Shop, after having read, perhaps for some of you for the first time, for others, having reread the novel in its entirety, what you think about it. So our focus is the ending of Curiosity Shop, the last few chapters, and the even for people who haven't read the novel, they know that, alas, and it's not a spoiler, that Nell dies. Um, and that's the thing that everyone, even if they haven't read the novel, knows about the old Curiosity Shop, and that it takes a long time to get to the point of Nell's death. So the novel is famous for that feature, but that's not all there is to the Curiosity Shop. And so there are three things that I want to talk about today. Um, I want to talk about endings. What is an ending, and what is the ending of the old Curiosity Shop? I always like to think that Dickens's novels have more than one ending.
Mhm.
And so, in asking the question of ending, I'd like us to think about ending in the plural form. That is, there are many endings to the novel. So, I want you to talk about both what you think about the ending of this book and about the possibility of there being multiple endings. And I think there are multiple endings to. Um, and then the second thing that I want to talk about is the form of the novel, the plot structure of this novel. And um, that's that's a topic that is also related to the ending, because if we talk about the ending to what part of the novel, or the ending to what storyline, or what is the central story, what are the other stories, the subplots, if you will, of Curiosity Shop, and how do they end? And um, and then the last thing that I want to talk about is the illustrations to the novel. And I, I I forget if I asked the question earlier or in a previous session, um, if everyone read the novel with the illustrations included. And if you use the Penguin edition, you have a complete set of illustrations. But there's some sort of technical questions about the illustrations. But when we think not only about the ending or endings of this novel, um, I think we need to think about it uh, as a whole. And the illustrations are a quick way, if we think about it, to review the entire novel. So I'd like to think of Curiosity Shop as a picture book, and to run through all of the illustrations very quickly as the last thing that we do. So, just as a general question, help me or help all of you together to think about the ending or the endings of the old Curiosity Shop. The most famous of those is, of course, the death of Nell. And tell me your thoughts, your reactions, your uh, uh, feelings. I'm happy to know your feelings as well as your thoughts about this. So, Mary, yes, and people will use the raised hand function to indicate their.
Dickens prepared the reader very well for Nell's death. We knew from several chapters before that things were not going to turn out well for her. What surprised me, though, was I found myself more emotionally touched by grandfather's passing than I did for Nell's because I'd been prepared for Nell's. I was and I think it was good on Dickens' part to maybe divert the reader a little bit from the sadness connected with Nell. Um, and then he didn't immediately end it. He went on and he tied together loose ends with other characters and what happened to them. And I think that was a good idea too, because the death of a child is a very hard thing to take. And I think Dickens handled it well.
Okay. So already we have two endings to talk about. One is the death of Nell and the reaction of other people to the death of Nell, which includes, and I think you're right, Mary, to say that grandfather is a focus for the reaction. So we have the actual death, and we have the mourning that takes place, the reactions of other people to that horrifying event. And then we have the last chapter in which, in a rather conventional way, Dickens tells us what happened to many of the characters, including the pony. um, so not all of the endings are unhappy endings or reactions directly to Nell's death. So, okay, thank you, Mary. Barbara, unmute.
I think two of your questions are interrelated. He's got more than one plot going on, and how do you resolve the wandering plot when they are journeying out into the countryside? And he does make an attempt and to respond to what Mary said. You know, he also tries to be funny about Sam Bass going to prison. That whole section is an attempt to alleviate our sadness about Nell dying, make it sound like he's going on some kind of a trip. And I don't know. I traced back. I found that I got to Nell's death and I cried again. And it's like I tried to trace back why in a book where Nell doesn't really represent any of the evils of Victorian society, which is the norm, kind of the norm. And how has he created this character and this rambling book, and then the catharsis happens again. So
It works for you.
it works for me, yes. The last very Victorian wrap up, some of that I think is a little bit of a stretch, but you know, conventions and all that. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So a strong vote for tears at the end of of Curiosity Shop. So Kath Beale.
Well, I was surprised. This is my first time of reading the book, but I knew Nell died. But in the couple of paragraphs where Nell died, he says death is said 6 times, twice rather. Dead, referring to Nell, is said 6 times, and dying is said once. So
Yeah.
he really hammers home what's happened to Nell. There's no way you can think, oh, she's just having a little sleep, because Dickens just pushes it to you. You know, it's there. It's so emphasized. But I thought what happened to um, the Brass people was sort of anti-Semitic. Oh yeah, okay, they were villains, but I mean, the descriptions I found of him in prison were quite awful. There he was on the treadmill, um, which broke people's ankles and legs and was not a pleasant thing at all. And yet Dickens is making light of it. Very strange, I thought.
You say anti-Semitic.
Yeah, yeah, because they were. You got the impression I got earlier, that they were Jewish people. Where they came from was a Jewish area of London, and just I thought he was a typical, not just Dickens, very Victorian, um, anti-Semitic hint going on there. I'm sure the Victorians picked up on it a lot, quite quickly.
And that's not the usual way of reading the Brass couple.
Is it not? Oh dear.
It's not, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible. Of course, the novel but one before this was Oliver Twist, and Fagin clearly is the most famous Jewish character in Dickens's oeuvre. So it certainly is possible. I wasn't aware that Beavis Marks was a Jewish neighborhood, but it could very well be. I don't recall any other elements about the description of the Brasses that would identify them as Jewish, but it's possible. About the violence, the punishment. I mean, one of the ways that novels end, particularly novels that have strong elements of good and bad. There's an identifiably good character in this novel, and there are identifiably bad characters in the Brass family. Samson more so than Sally. I mean, Sally is a more complex figure, I think, than Samson. But both must be punished because both are in opposition to the moral allegory that hovers always in the background of this novel. But Martha, why don't you tell us about the ending for you? Yes, and unmute.
Had an extremely emotional reaction. I happened to pick up my novel on the day I found out that Pope had died, and I lost it. I just totally lost it on both the Pope and the book. So it just gave me a totally different view of the book, I think, a more dramatic view, because here I am very sad about that death. And then there's Nell's death, and there's all these things happening in that chapter. And I really feel that Dickens did a beautiful job of describing what he wanted to describe about this situation with Nell, etc. And he's writing about Mary, the death of Mary, his sister-in-law. And I think he did a beautiful job. And I think I just felt like he must have felt very proud of, even though it was dramatic, maybe a little bit too much for some people, I just think he did a beautiful job of expressing that. And that's how I felt about it.
Okay. And you refer, of course, to the death of Mary Hogarth, the sister-in-law, the young sister-in-law who died earlier early in Dickens's marriage. She is often cited as the model, or as a model for Nell. And but the question of when Dickens decided that Nell must die is one that scholars have speculated about. And one could say that her death was inevitable from the beginning. and that it was foreshadowed, that it was prepared for in many ways by scenes earlier in the novel. And indeed, if we go completely biographical, that it was foreshadowed by the death of Mary, the sister-in-law. And yet there isn't conclusive evidence that Dickens had decided from the beginning that death would be the end of her journey. And I think that's important for us as readers, that we must retain some hope that one of the various rescue possibilities that are uh, threaded through the novel. There are many rescue attempts, including the committee of mostly elderly gentlemen who are led by the single gentleman, mysterious character who shows up in the middle of the novel, will find her before her untimely end. So we might talk a little bit about what foreshadows, at what point Nell's death in the text, not in what you knew about the text before you read it, uh, what traces there are that determine her death. So I'll leave that question lingering, and I'll go on to David Brownell. It's good to see you, David. I'm sorry to have learned about your fall, and are you on a bed of pain, or how are you doing?
Less painful than it was. I'm in a rehab facility, and I can't control the background noise, so there may be interruptions.
Okay. Well, we're very glad to have you with us today, David. So tell us your thoughts about the ending.
Well, the first thing I'm reminded, I was thinking about the everybody else ending. I'm reminded of what Rossini said about the ending of operas in his day, where at the end of the opera, there's a grand finale and all the significant cast are downstage singing their lungs out. Rossini said to somebody, "We call that the row of cabbages." So some of what's going on in the everybody else ending is, as is often the case, Dickens theatrical. Yes, you want everybody taken care of. All the significant performers should get a curtain call.
And go ahead.
To the question of whether Nell's death is determined, I would say what I said before, that this is really an unplanned novel for Dickens, and he's winging it. It does occur to me to ask, okay, if there is a miraculous intervention and Nell is restored to health, what does the future offer for her? The Marchioness has a future, but I can't quite see what would be a happy ending for Nell. That's about all I've got.
Yes, there is that passage, and I think the introduction to the Penguin edition mentions it, in which grandfather says she will be a woman soon. And Nell is almost 14. We know, so she's 13 years old. She's on the cusp of puberty, and she's an object of Quilp's sexual longings. Will you be my number two? He says to her, and he kisses her right on the rosy spot on her cheek. And so there are these hints of a sexual maturation for Nell. But it's hard to think of Nell as a woman. It's hard to think of her as having children because she's referred to constantly by the narrator as the child. She never escapes from childhood or from the identity of the child. And so, yes, I think that raising the question about Nell's futurity, what would a life after rescue, a miraculous salvation of Nell in this world be like? And as David says, it's hard to imagine that. And I think also we do need to keep in mind, it's very important to recall that this is a novel that was not planned in advance. There are no number plans for the Old Curiosity Shop. It's not until Dombey and Son, usually considered the first novel of Dickens's maturity. This is a story. I even hesitate to call it a novel because I think a novel. I would make the argument that the Old Curiosity Shop is not a novel, or at least not a Victorian novel. I think you could make that argument for Nicholas Nickleby and say that Nicholas Nickleby conforms to one of the dominant genres of the Victorian fiction. It's a Bildungsroman. It's about Nicholas growing up, and the other dominant form of the Victorian novel is the marriage plot, and it's hard to imagine a marriage plot for Nell. The novel begins with hints of a marriage plot, a dangerous one, in which Dick Swiveller, being manipulated by Nell's brother, Fred Trent, might be a candidate for Nell's husband. But that really goes awry early on. So the Old Curiosity Shop is neither a Bildungsroman nor a novel structured around the marriage plot, though it has hints of both. And this is something that I want to talk about, and that Wayne has also pointed us to in thinking about the form of the plot for this novel. So thank you for those contributions as well. Gary.
Yes, thank you. I had not read this book since high school, believe it or not. When I was a junior in high school, and I chose it as several Dickens novels to do a report on. And I didn't, in this second reading, this many years later, I did not, well, the first time I did not pay attention to the everyone else component of the ending that David is talking about. And of course I was just devastated by Nell dying and so forth. And then I started to think about the death of a child, and I couldn't help but think about Dombey and Son that we read online a few weeks, or on Zoom, and we read it I don't know how long ago, a couple of years ago, I think it was. Now I've lost track of time. And the son in that dying very early in the novel. So in a sense, of course, at that stage of the game, Dickens is farther along in his genius. And I'm thinking about this novel in terms of, even though it was not as well planned, the ending in which, and it's a detail, where Kit is taking his children back to the house where Nell lived. the second to last paragraph. And he says, he sometimes, or the narrator says, he sometimes took them to the street where she had lived. I think it's a fascinating paragraph. But new improvements had altered it so much, it was not the same. And then it goes on, and then there's this line, but he soon became uncertain of the spot, would only say it was thereabouts, he thought, and that these alterations were confusing. And I couldn't help but think about the beginning of the novel when Nell is lost, and the narrator at the beginning is helping her find her way home. And I'm always reminded of this when I read this now, of this novel being not just about loss, because the huge theme of loss here, but also about being lost. And even at the end here, there's something sort of, I don't know, the last line says that the quote, such are the things which a few years bring back, and so do things pass away, like a tale that is told, is from the Psalms in the Bible. But I also think there's sort of a fairy tale quality to this at the end. And that was my reading this time when I was looking at it, and certainly paying attention to the everyone else plot, which was fascinating, including the fact that Quilp's wife and her new husband lived off the dead dwarf's, I forget the exact line, it was a great line, off the dead dwarf's money. So yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, a lot of ideas there.
No, that's very good, and I particularly like your calling attention to that that hint of ambiguity in the ending.
Oh yeah.
One, you know, that Kit's job is to remember and tell the story of Nell, but the details of it are not quite. He doesn't have certain control over certain details in the story, particularly the location of the shop.
And it slips into the passive voice.
And it slips into the passive voice, yes, a tale that was told. And in thinking about the question of endings, plural endings, we have the Nell ending, we have the ending that focuses on the mourners, the reactions of people, of grandfather in particular, to Nell's death. We have the everyone else, what happened to them, and lo and behold, there are several marriage plots that emerge at the end. So this novel is, and Wayne's very useful slide, which I'll show later on, talks about the novel struggling to find an ending that would tie things together. And the passage that you read about Kit's difficulty in tying things together is a loose end in what otherwise seems like the conventional story of wrapping everything up in a neat package. So thank you for those, Gary. Yes, Glenna.
Yeah, before I talk, I just wanted to say that Catherine Gill has had her hand up a lot.
That's okay. Well, shall I go ahead?
Sure.
Okay, I wanted to say what struck me as the most realistic part of the whole description of the death, both of Nell and the grandfather, because frankly, to me, she's too angelic, thinking particularly about all that she's been through. She's just such a perfect little angel, and I think children of that age who have gone through what she's gone through, it's just hard to imagine them being as tranquil and accepting of all that's happened. For me, the most realistic part of the description of the loss of Nell is in my Penguin. It's on page 660, and it's almost at the end of the second to the last chapter when Dickens describes the link between people who have lost a loved one and inanimate objects.
Mhm.
It's the paragraph that begins, if there be any who have never known the blank that follows death, the weary void, the sense of desolation that will come upon the strongest minds when something familiar and beloved is missed at every turn, the connection between inanimate and senseless things and the object of recollection, when every household god becomes a monument and every room a grave. I will just share that a friend of mine who lost her husband a few years ago, before I reread this section of the book and read that paragraph, I had been hearing from her about how simple objects in the house bring back the memories of their life together and how important that is to hang on to the objects which are that length. And then when I read that, I thought that has such a ring of truth, that it's inanimate linked with the memories of the person who has been lost. So to me, that was a very poignant paragraph. But like I say, I found Nell as a person, and even the grandfather at the end, given his almost saintly behavior as he's just waiting there and can't really accept that she is gone. It just seemed a little unrealistic given all that we've seen both of them go through in the preceding chapters. I guess I don't think children of that age, having gone through what she's gone through, would be so perfect and accepting and devout, etc. But that's just my thought. But I thought that inanimate object link was very powerful.
Very good, Karen. Thank you for calling our attention to that. And this is a story, a book that is full of objects. I mean, the curiosity shop itself as a setting is full of inanimate objects that are animated. And when we get to that passage that you read, objects are the repository of the blankness, but they're no longer animate. And I think your analogy to the friend whose loss is embodied in the memories that are there in inanimate objects is perfectly appropriate. So thank you for that. Glenna, did you want to
Are you ready for me?
I'm ready for you.
All righty. Well, I've been playing, I should explain, I never could turn the volume up on my friend's computer. So I had my phone on, but then I heard you folks, but then there was going to be feedback. So it's been a complicated game to try and participate, but I'm trying. I want to say the multiple endings, some of them are very interesting. I love moral trajectories that go in the right direction. Therefore, Dick Swiveller and the Marchioness, I love that. But I think where it comes to the main thread of Little Nell, I know that we're not necessarily supposed to reduce everything to biography of the author, but it seems to me that this was written at a time that Dickens had a desperate need to find meaning in the death of a young girl to whom he'd been very attached. And I think that the reason that it had so much meaning for readers in the 19th century is that so many families, households, were looking for meaning in the death of a young creature. And so there's a need to, I think Paul Dombey's death is more artful, maybe because the need isn't quite so aching. But here we need to, it's almost as if Little Nell has to be an archetype of everything good, that the arc of her life is she starts out good and gets better, that she's an exemplary to all of us. And in painting her in such completely unrealistic, but glowing, magically beautiful terms, he's giving himself solace, and he must have given, even though I think it's really interesting, he couldn't decide whether she was going to live or die, but I think there must have been all kinds of issues going on internally for him as he's writing this. And so the very readers who are hoping against hope she's going to be able to live, I mean, there have been all these signs that she isn't. And so I think more than most texts, the readers of this must have had a very complicated relationship with reading this book. They were working out some of their own personal traumas, as I think he was working out his. And I must say that I started off, I hadn't reread this book. Most Dickens novels I've reread many times. This one I hadn't reread since I was about the age Gary says he was. I think I was a teenager. Once I started figuring what I just said out for myself, whether it's right or not, I don't know, I came to like the book a whole lot better because I could see, well, I'm a historian, and I could see the impact of 19th century demography playing out and the impact it had on the author and the readers. And that's enough for me. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Those are excellent remarks to remind us of the historical fact of infant mortality in the 19th century and the way in which this fictional representation of the death of a child would resonate with so many of Dickens's readers. And we know, of course, the enormous readership. We know the enormous readership that by the time, well, by the middle of the serialization of The Old Curiosity Shop, it was selling 100,000 copies every week. It was by far and away, Pickwick was a tremendous success, but it was a monthly. And this was a weekly serialization. People were reading this as if it were the news of the day. They wanted every week to know what would happen to Nell. And Nell, I think in that sense, becomes a member of the family for many of the readers. So Sarah.
Yeah, so there were a few things that I expected will happen and didn't happen, and now I like that it didn't happen. So I did expect that in the ending, Kit will get some time to spend with her, and they'll talk and say goodbye. I did expect that the single gentleman will meet his brother and it will do some good to the old man, and it didn't happen. But I think now that it didn't happen for a purpose. Something much bigger happened. And Gray and other people mentioned remembering her. So it doesn't matter if he remembers all the detail, but the fact of remembering, during her meditation on death, we talked about it going on and on, but she was meditating and thinking about this. And one of the things that she really focused on was how to remember the dead people. And she had the flower, and she worried about who is going to tend to the flowers and what happens if the flowers die. So she got her memory. And the story tells us that she was dead for 2 days. So she was dead, but she continued to speak. And what she said, the thing she uttered, is remembering everything that she went through and remembering the people that helped her. The two of them are the two sisters. And it's so beautiful that even though the young brother didn't have his nice meeting with his older brother, he then goes and traces her out and meets all the people that she met. And he has a means to help them, to help those people who helped her. So I thought it's a very, very nice ending.
in connection with the question of remembering, one other place that we can go to think about endings in the plural for this book is to the preface that Dickens wrote, the dedication that Dickens made to the book. All of these are after the novel is completed. And the book is dedicated to Samuel Rogers, a not very well-known writer from the earlier part of the 19th century, and someone whom Dickens admired and read greatly. And his principal book was entitled The Pleasures of Memory. And so it's about memory. Memory is one of the motifs, one of the central themes of the novel. And I think it's important, it's significant that the book is dedicated to the author of the pleasures and the pains of memory. I mean,
Yeah.
implied. So, Karen, are we back to you? Yes.
Okay. I had to look back, and we last saw Nell alive in chapter 55. And if I'm correct, and here we are at chapter the 71st, and she's dead. And what is remarkable to me is that the actual death of little Nell doesn't happen in the novel. It's off stage. And here we have one of the most famous scenes in all of literature. It doesn't actually happen in the novel, but that to me makes it all the more dramatic, because I think the agony of going through it would have detracted from the fact that she had died. And I find that remarkable. And I find it remarkable that she's not in these 20 some chapters, and then when we revisit it, one other thing, one of the commentaries I was reading about the novel referred to the William Wordsworth poem, We Are Seven. And it said in this commentary that this poem was thought to have contributed to Dickens' portrait of little Nell's death. And it's a beautiful poem. It's long, or I would read it, but William Wordsworth, We Are Seven. And it's this whole faith of the feeling heart, the sentimentality, the sentiments that are moral. I think Glenna or someone talked about moral trajectories, and it's almost embracing death as the ideal. And that's what I think we see here. Somebody might call it angelic, yes, but I think it's really an embracing of dying as an ideal from both Dickens' Christian perspective, but also just in general. And that really struck me. And I have to thank you, John, because either last session or the session before, we were talking about sentimentality in general and this novel. And you brought up the Fred Kaplan book, Sacred Tears. And that was just the most wonderful little book of talking about sentimentality in the 19th century as depicting moral character and the good in people. It was a good thing. And tears are coming back, and tears always come to me with the end of this novel in a good way. It is like a catharsis, like Martha said.
Yes, yes. Thank you. And one of this is a small response to one of the things you said. When people talk about the death of little Nell, they often talk about it as if it's something that happens in the book, that is dramatized as scene. And there is no deathbed scene. There is a protracted prelude to Nell's death. And then an after the fact hammering with that repetition of dead, 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 6 times, as we were told earlier. And I forget who it was who counted the number, but that was very good. And there is no deathbed scene. People think that Dickens was interested only in writing about the deaths of children as if they were deathbed scenes that were sentimental. And that's not quite what happens in this book. Peter. And unmute.
There is a deathbed picture, but there's no deathbed scene in the novel. There's an illustration of her laying on the bed. But anyway, I like Glenna's response that Nell's death can like be seen almost as a generic death of a child. Like Nell is so idealized and so abstract that it's actually not her death, but it's actually not her death that interested me reading it this time. It was the grandfather's response. I didn't cry when Nell died because I kind of knew she was going to die, right? But what surprised me this time was the amount of time that is spent dealing with the grandfather's grief, and his response to the way that, he just can't believe that she's gone. His attachment to her is so. If I teared up, it was over the grandfather's grief. There's a moment like on page 540. Ever and anon, he pressed her hand to his lips, then he hugged it to his breast again, murmuring that it was warmer, meaning he doesn't want her to die. Maybe she's reviving now. And as he said it, he looked in agony to those who stood around him, as if imploring them to help her. That causes me to tear up. If you've ever known like a person whose child has died, it's like, my goodness, how can they possibly deal with that? It happened to me once, when I was in graduate school. A little girl downstairs drowned in the bathtub, and it was like how do you deal with what do you say to the person who has lost a child? So anyway, the tears. It's like I was this time I was interested in the grandfather's response. He doesn't want her to have died. He kind of wants to believe, and then the little boy starts helping him. The little boy actually starts helping him accommodate himself to the fact that his granddaughter is gone. So that's the thing that causes me to sort of tear up about the ending. And what was another thing I was going to say? Oh yeah. Well, the idea of Nell being so ideal that you can't imagine her. She's like symbolic in a certain sense. She's a symbol of all that's good. And the only place for the perfectly good is in heaven, But in terms of the marriage plot, we get that displaced onto like Barbara and Kit. And then my favorite, well, I guess Glenna mentioned this, and I thought it was Swiveller and the Marchioness. It's almost comic. It's almost like funny. He actually helps her get an education, which is right on. It's like she's the kind of little girl that needs to go, get an education. And then all of a sudden, she turns out she's educated. And she's 19, and he looks around and he goes, maybe I should marry her. It's kind of funny. He doesn't really think that he's doing this out of sort of the gracious, he's educating her out of the graciousness of his heart. And then all of a sudden it occurs to him, wow, maybe I should marry her. So that's an amusing sort of like marriage plot ending.
Yes.
The marriage gets displaced onto like Barbara and Kit and the Marchioness and Swiveller.
Yes.
Anyway,
yes.
okay, that's
and Mrs. Quilp's remarriage and living off of the
the
legacy of Quilp. So yes, there are marriage plots that are part of the ending and that don't redeem or they don't deny the fact of Nell's death, but they give us in the comic plotting of the novel some sense of joy, some sense of laughter. And this is a comic book in many respects, despite the melancholy of the central story. Clark.
This is a fantastic discussion. Right now, my brain feels like an old curiosity shop. It's just a jumble of ideas, fantastic comments. I really like the idea of this is a book about loss. And John, your idea from way back about the book is an old curiosity shop, that we're dealing with things that have been lost and tucked away, and we're trying to make sense of them. I feel like the ending of the book is kind of like Kit's journey that precedes the final chapters, that it's bracing and then it's snow and you're stumbling towards some destination. You're not sure and I feel I stumble through these last chapters, but looking, this is the first time I read the book, and looking back over some pages a little while ago, Nell won't die in the book. We get her death at the end of chapter 71, and then 72 picks up with another version. And so I really feel like, as others have said, that this is not just the death of a character. This is Dickens dealing with an idea that is deeply troubling. I think he's working something out himself in telling this story, and it doesn't go easily for him. The focus is on her heavenly existence, which is reassuring. And I can't help but think that maybe that brief little reference to King Lear in the chapter 72, come boy come. I mean, Nell is a Cordelia, an utterly good character that we have to think of as innocent and kind of ageless. I agree with that. I think that there is something about her that is, she's transformed in life into something that's not quite human. And so when she dies, I'm not particularly moved by her death because it is such an idea. And I find that the grandfather's reaction deeply moving. And I kind of feel like, Dickens is dealing with the question that bugged Dostoevsky. What happens when good people die, especially young people die? It's a difficult thing to deal with. Catherine and I were in London for our spring break a few weeks back, and we went to the Foundling Museum after we went to Doughty Street, and that was eye-opening to me. The presence of death, especially of young people, terrifying for a modern existence. But I want to thank everyone for their it's fantastic.
And I second that praise to the everyone who has participated thus far in the conversation. I hope we can continue. One of the things that I'll comment on specifically in your remarks, Clark, is the fact that it's Kit who goes ahead of the other group. There's the single gentleman and his retinue, and Kit is the one who precedes them and goes to the ecclesiastical outbuilding where Nell has been rescued, and it's the closest thing to a home that we have had thus far for Nell. And he comes up to the window to look in, and the window is closed. There's a curtain. He can't see inside. So, and then what he can discern is a sound, and the sound is an unearthly sound. It's a voice, but it's not like a voice. It's a kind of keening, a sound that he can't quite identify, and then the weekly installment ends. So we're not allowed to look in the window because it's curtained over, and all we have as evidence of what is behind the door and behind the window is a sound. And then next week, the following week, we enter and we discover that the sound is grandfather uttering this unearthly sound. But grandfather does not know or does not believe that Nell is dead. And in a sense, that's his dementia, that grandfather can't allow himself to believe that Nell is dead. But it also maintains that faint possibility that she may be alive still, that we may be in time to have effectuated the rescue. But that sound, that unearthly sound, is, I think, the appropriate sound, because it is the cry of pain that readers are experiencing when they discover the inevitable fact. So, David.
I want to circle around the subject of the death of children in 19th century novels. Mortality rates being what they were, this is reflected by the books. The author on whom I did my dissertation, in a book in the 1880s called Womankind, which was addressed to Anglican girls, says, hardly a one of you but will have known a little classmate who died. And that's something that just isn't so for us at this time. There are an enormous number of deathbed scenes in Victorian literature. One I recall again in a Charlotte Young novel. They're gathered around the dying child's deathbed. And the doctor says, let us pray. Meaning, okay, that's it. So they all get down and pray. And after some while, the narrator comments that they got up because their knees hurt. It's a touch of realism that always appealed to me. Anyhow, one of the tearjerkers in the late century was a book by Canon Farrar, I think he was at St. Paul's, called Eric, or Little by Little. If you know Kipling's Stalky and Company, Stalky and his buddies at school have the most withering scorn for that book. It's one of very few Victorian books that I ever started and couldn't bear to make myself finish. It's pretty awful. Young wrote a review of it for a magazine in which she said, you know, Eric was the sort of book that children were given by their godparents. Eric declines in a saintly way. And Young, in her review, says she thinks this book is profoundly immoral. The lesson it offers to children is that if you behave in a saintly way, you get the great reward of dying young. I think one of the things that's going on with the death of children in the literature and in life is people trying to make some sort of sense out of it. How could God let this happen? Does God have anything to do with it? Pass on there. It just seems to be something that is easy to pass over because it's so alien to us. All these children getting off. But one needs to think about it.
And Dickens had written about the death of children, did not make it as central to the story in novels that preceded this. In Oliver Twist, there's a character who has only a brief appearance in the novel whose name is Dick. Little Dick dies, and Oliver survives. And in Nicholas Nickleby, there's Smike, who's a little bit older than Nell, but again, an early death. And the religious, the spiritual question of how could God let such things happen lingers around all of these deaths. So Don, and then Kirk.
I just have a couple of things.
Please.
I'm thinking with the grandfather that I'm wondering with his dementia, is there also a strong sense of guilt? Because from before we even meet the grandfather, he's endangering Nell by leaving her alone at night when he goes out and gambles. And we see all of the things he does during the story. So while he's attached to her, it only seems to me at the end, before she dies, that he realizes what he's done. And I'm just thinking a lot of his wanting to bring her back is to probably want to make amends, for what he's done. The other thing for me was I was just fascinated with Dick Swiveller because I think of all the characters, he has the major character arc, and there's no real arc for anybody else in the book. They're either good or they're bad, or they're kind of a mix. But for him, we see him change from this happy-go-lucky guy who's willing to do anything to really caring about somebody, and then that changes that person's life as well as his own. So I just found him fascinating. I wanted his story to continue on. I thought that was great.
Yes, there certainly is a futurity to Dick's life, and to the some people have said that the marriage that takes place between Dick and the Marchioness, to whom he gives the incredible name of what is it? I always forget. Sophronia Sphinx. Is the happiest marriage in all of Dickens. I'm not sure that that's actually true, but it is certainly one of the happier marriages. And it's clear that as Dickens is trying to end the novel, he wants to have some kind of counterpoint to the story of Nell's demise. And he finds that in the story of the Marchioness. And someone, I think it was last month, said, this is the fairy tale story, and Dick is the fairy godmother who shows up and rescues the Cinderella of this novel. And then the Marchioness actually becomes the instrument of Kit's rescue from the false charges that the Brasses have brought against him. So unlike Nell, who is, aside from the fact that she walks over half of the country of England, is a relatively passive figure in the book. The Marchioness becomes active, and we actually have an illustration of her riding in the coach to go to the rescue of Kit. So, Kirk.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for a great series of discussions, first of all. Second of all, at the Christmas Carol universe, someone told me, well, if you're having trouble reading the long novels, just think about it as a screenplay. Think about it as something that's being shot. And especially in this sequence at the end of the novel, sound is so important. You've got editing, you've got sound, you've got wonderful visuals, you've got great dialogue, you've got a great scenario structure. And so this is simply in my mind, one of the great screenplays ever written, but it's in the form of a 600-page book, and it's amazing. I did have a question for you, Professor Jordan. Do you think that Dickens, in this book or any book, was really aiming for immortality, or was he just doing stuff that he liked writing about and was publishing for a popular audience? And much like Shakespeare, who was trying to capture an audience's attention and hold it, Dickens was just doing his craft as best he could and wasn't thinking about posterity or great art.
I think Dickens is very much living in the moment. Publishing on a weekly schedule is a very taxing and challenging means of publication. The book has so many elements that seem improvisational. I think he, of course, is an ambitious writer and always measuring himself against the great predecessors, including Sir Walter Scott and Shakespeare. And in this book, I think Fielding as well, who is mentioned in one of the prefaces that he wrote. So he's thinking he's thinking big in terms of the company he wants to keep, but he's also very much winging it in the present and keeping his eye on the sales. And when Master Humphrey's Clock, the weekly magazine sales started to drop, he knew that the thing he had that was going to bring the sales back up was that story about the little girl. And so here he goes. So I think it's a combination of the two. And the other thing that links him to Shakespeare, I think, in regard to your sort of either or version, immortality or just popular culture, is that the two of them go together. I mean, Shakespeare is writing for the pit. He's writing for the popular theatrical audience. And Dickens is writing for the popular reader. This is a very democratic novel. It's a novel that is written to please not the elite, but to participate in popular culture. And one of the things that I like about this book is the very loose improvisational structure. And this is sort of, I'm heading toward one of the topics that I mentioned at the start of our session today, that the structure of this novel is very loose. It's an episodic plot, and Wayne last time talked about two versions of a plot structure. One is the episodic plot, and this Curiosity Shop is very much an episodic narrative. Nell goes from place to place and she meets strange person after strange person. But there are some arcs in the story. Kit's story being one of them, Kit and Barbara, which is a very Shakespearean structure, that you look for the comic plot underneath the tragic plot in a Shakespeare play. And there's an appeal in the story of Kit because Kit is working class. Kit is a servant to the ordinary life of everyday Victorians, not to just the elite. And at the same time, King Lear hovers in the background of this novel, and so it's we have. I love, for example, The Visit to Astley's, the music hall theater that Kit goes to with the two mothers and Jacob and the baby, and they love the popular entertainment that takes place at Astley's, and it's very much it's reminiscent of one of the sketches in Sketches by Boz, And Sketches by Boz is not a novel. It's just a series of sketches of London life. And Dickens is giving us a sketch there. It doesn't have any plot importance. It's just time out, let's go to the theater and have a good time and eat oysters at the end. And it's a celebration of working class culture and a celebration of popular entertainment and of eating and drinking. And Dick Swiveller participates in that world also. I mean, Dick is a little bit dissolute. He's interested in what he likes to call moistening the clay. I don't know if you picked up that phrase, but to moisten the clay means to have a drink, right? But to moisten the clay also has a more serious dimension to it, because to moisten the clay meaning the body, from earth to earth, ashes to ashes, earth to earth, the clay is the mortal body. And to moisten it can mean alcohol and celebrations and food and drink, but it can also mean tears. And so this is a novel that's interested in moistening the clay. And I think Dick Swiveller is the comic embodiment of that. But he also has a little bit of a threshold acquaintance with death, and his illness and recovery is juxtaposed to Nell's death, where there is no moistening of the clay that brings her back to life. So that's a little bit of a digression by way of answer to your question. Yes, Ginny.
Yes. So one, I want to talk about the ending part, which I thought was interesting because not only was it summing up where everybody was, but I felt like it showed how Nell sort of touched everybody's lives and brought all these people together. Even though she was very passive, her leaving and disappearing caused almost all the in contact with one another through her disappearing, Quilp bringing in the brasses, Kit having to leave and find other work. So it really showed how it touched lives, and also Dickens showing how life goes on. Even though there's been a tragedy, life continues to go on and people live their lives and there's memories. And like Kit at the end, even though he, the street changes, the house is torn down, the curiosity shop's no longer there, but the memory of Nell for him will always live on, and he wants to pass that on to his children, of somebody who really touched his life and touched all those other lives. And I can't go away without saying how I love the fact that he spent 2 paragraphs on the pony, who, when I read the novel the first time, I loved the pony. I thought, oh my gosh, this guy knows horses and ponies in particular, and their attitudes. And the fact that he took 2 paragraphs to talk about the pony, which is longer than he talked about some of the other characters, what happened to them, made sure that we knew that the pony lived a great life and went on to sort of help everybody else as well. So I thought you had all the sadness of Nell's death, the grandfather's death, the fact that his brother, the single gentleman, was never really reunited with everybody in any meaningful way because he didn't recognize him. But in following up by starting with the brasses and making it hysterical, I love the satire of his description of what came of them. It's just great satire. Get on and sort of get everybody laughing again, and then just touching on everybody's life, but also show Nell touched all these lives and that she will live on always in the memory, and hopefully Kit's children. And I think that made a difference to make the ending so much more uplifting.
All very good points. Thank you for that. Yes, Glenna.
I wanted to talk about the pony. The most charming parts of this book have to do with the pony. I love the pony. And I want to say, I recently read Lessons in Chemistry, a recent bestseller, and the dog in Lessons in Chemistry 630. I love the character of the dog. And the pony is a wonderful predecessor. I mean, the pony has such a wonderful will of its own, and its relationship with Kit. Everything that ascribed to the pony is completely delightful. I love, love, love the pony. Okay.
3 cheers for the pony. Yes. And yes, Nell is a thread that goes through the novel because she touches everyone. I mean, and I want to, I did prepare some slides, and I want to sort of shift to the slides that I showed in order to bring in a few other points about the novel. So Ava, if you could start with the map, and this is a slide that Wayne prepared for last month's discussion, and that I'm taking the liberty of borrowing from him. And this is just a reminder of the length of the journey that Nell makes. Most of this journey is on foot. So she's walking across the country. She's walking from London. I don't know if surely someone has counted the number of miles that she traverses. Occasionally she gets a ride in a coach, and once she gets a ride on a canal boat. And transportation, I think, is one of the themes of the novel. And Nell, you could say that Nell walks herself to death. I mean, that's why does Nell die? She's just exhausted. She has worn out physically. But another thing that this does, and here I borrow a little bit from the work of my colleague Jonathan Grossman, who teaches at UCLA, who's written a book called Dickens's Networks. And it has a chapter, very interesting chapter, on the Old Curiosity Shop. And one of the things that he points out, and this map helps us to remember, is that the novel is set before the age of railroads, or anyway, there are no railroads in the Old Curiosity Shop. Railroads begin, and railway lines begin to emerge in the late 1830s and 1840s. This novel is published in 1840 serially in 1840-41, and then in volume form, in book form, in 1841. So, but the setting of the novel is not exactly pre-industrial, but it's before the age of railroads. And the absence of any mention to railroads is significant. And when before the age of railroads, there were two networks that helped to support the Industrial Revolution, which is beginning at the end of the 18th century and continuing into the 19th, with the increasing importance of the urban centers in the north of England, where there was steam power to be had to fuel the industries. And Nell's journey takes her to one of the principal industrial cities in the north of England, which is Birmingham. And in order to get to Birmingham, you'll recall, she gets a ride on a canal boat. So what is important there is that canals were the principal network for Jonathan in his argument. Nell's journey takes place almost entirely outside the roads, the highways that coaches took. There were fast coaches that linked cities, but that sometimes often took days to get from London to the city of Manchester and Birmingham. The networks that united the nation, that united England, were highways on which speedy coaches took, mail coaches in particular, and canals. But Nell is, as Jonathan puts it, she's off the grid. one of the reasons that the people who are looking for Nell can't find her is that she's walking. She's not even on the great highways, the coach roads. She's walking on footpaths from village to village, with the exception of that one time when she's on the canal boat. So what else is there, Jonathan asks, that brings the nation together, that gives the nation a sense of its unity, rather than being just a collection of different neighborhoods and village communities, and with very little sense of the larger nation. And there are two things that link the nation in this book. One is culture. And culture in this novel is popular culture. The Mrs. Jarley's waxworks travels around the country. The Punch and Judy show travels around the country. These are very early signs of a cultural unification. Punch and Judy is a piece of popular culture that is recognized in all parts of England. It gives a sense of cultural unity to a nation that is not physically united. And Mrs. Jarley's waxworks is a kind of, comedic version of the history of England, both the popular culture and the high culture. And the dummies that travel, you can learn about the history of England and a little bit about high culture, because Lord Byron is one of the figures who's in the waxworks. And the waxwork figures can also be they're fungible. They can appear as one figure in one city, and then they can travel to another place, and you can change the costume on the dummy, the wax dummy, and tell a different story. So Mrs. Jarley's Waxworks is a kind of traveling history show, and Punch and Judy is a well-known popular story that anyone can understand in any part of the country. So Dickens is working with the question of how a country becomes a nation, becomes united, before the age of steam, before the age of the railroads. We have the industrial city of Birmingham, but Birmingham is still quite remote from London. So what will bring the nation together? And one form that it takes is the newspaper. And you remember when Kit is in jail under the false charges that have been, there's a turnkey, a man whose job it is to lock up the prisoners and who holds the keys. And he reads a newspaper. And the newspaper, it has been argued, is one of the ways in which a country comes together and discovers its national identity. So I think the fact that there's a character, a working class character who reads a newspaper. Newspapers were becoming national. You could, a paper that's published in London could be read in Birmingham or in some other city along the coaching roads. But Nell exists largely off the grid. Nell is not part of that network that unifies the nation. But Dickens has another way of helping to unite the country. Dickens is, and this is a sense in which Shakespeare, I think, is an important model for him. Shakespeare is something else that unifies the nation. People read and see performances of Shakespeare. So one of the great achievements of the Old Curiosity Shop is that it is read by such a large audience. It's popular culture. It takes its impulse, its inspirations from popular culture. The visit to Astley's, I think, is very important in that respect, because Astley's is a form of popular entertainment. And indeed, so is the Old Curiosity Shop. The Old Curiosity Shop is not high culture. It's in that sense, it's not a novel. It's a piece of entertainment. It's got Quilp as a, where does the energy of this novel lie? I think Quilp is, one of those villains that we love to read about, because there's so much verbal energy invested in the representations of Quilp. Whenever Quilp appears, the story comes alive. Nell, in that sense, is a passive figure whose energy level is never high. She's too perfect. She doesn't initiate actions other than to initiate the departure with grandfather. And what she's looking for is a place where they can rest, the country. The city is the source of a lot of the energy in this novel. The Brass couple, Quilp, and the city is itself a kind of network. When the novel opens, Master Humphrey encounters Nell walking through the streets of London. London itself is a kind of network. When Nell is out on the road, she doesn't meet people that she already knows. She meets new people, and she has encounters. And the structure of the novel is, in that sense, episodic. And it's only toward the end, as links and connections bring the structure of the novel back toward what some people have called a recursive plot. So give us the next slide, Ava. And this again comes, no, this is a passage that I wanted to show to you, because it's the title Revelation is not Dickens's title. It's a title that I gave. And after the death of Nell, after chapter 72, after the chapter The Last, the Old Curiosity Shop is finished, and we return to Master Humphrey's clock, which is where the novel began. And this is Master Humphrey speaking. And he's speaking to the book club called Master Humphrey's Clock. And you remember how how the book begins. It's part of that book club where they find a manuscript hidden in the clock, and they spend the evening reading and discussing that story. And then in the next week, there's another story. And it was out of that structure, that very episodic story by story structure, that the Old Curiosity Shop took over, and the story of Nell became the governing story, because Dickens knew that it would sell. So this is Master Humphrey speaking. I was musing the other evening upon the characters and incidents with which I had been so long engaged, wondering how I could ever have looked forward with pleasure to the completion of my tale, and reproaching myself for having done so, as if it were a kind of cruelty to those companions of my solitude with whom I had now dismissed and could never again recall. When my clock struck 10, punctual to the hour, my friends appeared. On our last night of meeting, we had finished the story which the reader has just concluded. Our conversation took the same current as the meditations which the entrance of my friends had interrupted, and the Old Curiosity Shop was the staple of our discourse. If I may confide to the reader now that in connection with this little history, I had something upon my mind, something to communicate. And Ada, please keep going on to the. I had something to contemplate, which I had all along with difficulty repressed, something I had deemed it during the progress of the story necessary to its interest to disguise, and which, now that it was over, I wished and was yet reluctant to disclose. To conceal anything from those to whom I am attached, it is not in my nature. I can never close my lips where I have opened my heart. This temper and the consciousness of having done some violence to it in my narrative laid me under a restraint which I should have had great difficulty in overcoming, but for a timely remark from Mr. Miles, who's a member of the book club, which, as I hinted in a former paper, is a gentleman of business habits and of great exactness and propriety in all his transactions. I could have wished, my friend objected, that we had been made acquainted with the single gentleman's name. I don't like his withholding his name. It made me look upon him at first with suspicion and caused me to doubt his moral character. I assure you, I am fully satisfied by this time of his being a worthy creature, but in this respect he certainly would not appear to have acted at all like a man of business. My friends, said I, this is Master Humphrey continuing, drawing to the table at which they were by this time seated in their usual chairs, do you remember that this story bore another title besides that one we have so often heard of late? Mr. Miles had his pocketbook out in an instant, and referring to an entry therein, rejoined, certainly, Personal Adventures of Master Humphrey. Here it is. I made a note of it at the time. I was about to resume that I had to tell them when the name Mr. Miles the same Mr. Miles again interrupted me, observing that the narrative originated in a personal adventure of my own, and that was no doubt the reason for its being thus designated. This led me to the point at once. You will one and all forgive me, I returned, if for the greater convenience of the story and for its better introduction, that adventure was fictitious. I had my share, indeed, no light or trivial one in the pages we have read, but it was not the share I feigned to have at first. The younger brother, the single gentleman, the nameless actor in this little drama stands before you now. It was easy to see they had not expected this disclosure. Yes, I pursued, I can look back upon my part in it with a calm but half smiling pity for myself as for some other man. But I am he indeed, and now the chief sorrows of my life are yours. I need not say what true gratification I derived from the sympathy and kindness with which the acknowledgment was received, nor how often it had risen to my lips before. Now, how difficult I had found it, how impossible when I came to those passages which touched me most and most nearly concerned me to sustain the character I had assumed. It is enough to say that I replaced in the clock case the record of so many trials, sorrowfully, it is true, but with a softened sorrow which was almost pleasure, and felt that in living through the past again and the page and communicating to others the lesson it had helped to teach me, I had been a happier man. We lingered so long over the leaves from which I had read that, as I consigned them to their former resting place, the hand of my trusty clock pointed to 12, and there came towards us upon the wind the voice of the deep and distant bell of St. Paul's as it struck the hour of midnight. So there's a revelation, another revelation that takes place outside the limits of the old curiosity shop, in which Master Humphrey reveals to his book club, and of course to the readers of Master Humphrey's Clock, that the single gentleman is in fact Master Humphrey. And this is an attempt to tie together the frame story of Master Humphrey's Clock with the story that has been told. So you'll recognize in this a version of the other revelation that takes place when we learn that the single gentleman is the younger brother of grandfather. And also we learned that the schoolmaster is the brother of Mr. Garland. So what's happening at these points is that here, after the fact, and in a way that seems unnecessary and almost improbable, Dickens is trying to unify the story that he's telling by bringing these characters back into a relationship with each other that in some way turns this very episodic plot structure into a more integrated and a more fictionally unified narrative. So let's go on to the next slide. And this is again from, I'm borrowing from Wayne, competing types of plot evident in Dickens's early novels. So there's the episodic plot, which is notably Pickwick Papers and some of Oliver Twist and The Old Curiosity Shop. Episodes may be related by similarity of conflict or theme, Pickwick's naivete or Oliver or Nell's vulnerability. The picaresque novel is a subset of this type. Narrative effect is centrifugal or expanding. And then there's the recurring or the recursive plot structure, often requires a backstory gradually revealed to the reader or intrigue on the part of the characters themselves. In Tom Jones and Oliver Twist, the backstory centers on the secret of the foundling's birth and his inheritance. The trauma plot found in A Tale of Two Cities and detective fiction are types of recurring or recursive narrative. In The Old Curiosity Shop, the Brass's intrigue with Quilp to ruin Kit, and the narrative effect is centripetal or constricting. And so I think in the next slide, please, Ava. And Wayne gives us this overview of the struggle that Dickens seems to have had in trying to introduce the recurring theme. In Oliver Twist, the secret of Oliver's birth is complicated by the intrigue of Monks and Fagin. Dickens revisited the novel in order to smooth the difficulty of inserting these features. In The Old Curiosity Shop, the shift to a recurring plot begins with chapter 34 and the appearance of the single gentleman. It develops in chapter 46 with the reunion of Nell and Trent and with the schoolmaster when Nell faints, and the illustration is of Nell fainting here. And there's a critic, Michal Ginsberg, contrasts these two plot structures as Nell's journey, which is a survival plot, with the later events, the plot of the sentimental homecoming. And so the plot of Swiveller is an example of that. Swiveller and the traces of the Bildungsroman, the novel of development, and the marriage plot with, or the fairy tale with the Marchioness are instances of the survival plot turning into the recurring plot or the more unified plot. And so this is another ending to the novel. And I think it juxtaposes the two plot structures that and the two generic structures that are present in The Old Curiosity Shop. So I just wanted that information to be there for you, and to use that as a way of talking about how plot is used in The Old Curiosity Shop. So the last thing I wanted to do is to go back and look at some of the illustrations. So Ava, if you could give us the illustrations. And I've thought about teaching this novel to young people. And I think it would be, this is a hard book to teach to young people because it doesn't conform to the the usual procedures with a single or a dominant plot. It has many traces of the episodic or journey of travel, the picaresque structure. And so there are 3 illustrators to the Old Curiosity Shop. There are actually 4 illustrators, and 2 of them contribute only 1 illustration, and the main illustrators are Hablo Brown and George Cattermole. And Christian Lehman, whom many of you who've been to the Dickens universe know, has a wonderful video in the series of videos that we did called Dickens to Go, in which he talks about the illustrations to the novel. And Old Curiosity Shop is a picture book, and it has the illustrations are unusual, both because it's a joint, a collaboration of 4 different illustrators, mostly Hablo Brown, who later adopted the pseudonym of Fizz to go with Boz to Dickens. George Cattermole does a few illustrations, mostly of architectural settings. And then there's this illustration, the only one done by a man named Samuel Williams. And it's early in the novel. And this shows Nell asleep in the Curiosity Shop. And some people have said that this illustration is actually the scene that foreshadows Nell's death. And I think that's probably too strong a way to put it, but there is definitely an echo between this illustration of Nell asleep before she leaves the Curiosity Shop in the illustration of Nell on her deathbed, which is at the end of the novel. So I'm just going to quickly run through some of these illustrations, and please notice that the title, which is up at the top, is not a title that comes from Dickens. This is some later 20th century person's title descriptive of the novel. The illustrations in Curiosity Shop were woodblock prints, not steel engravings, which is what we have in most of Dickens's novels. And they were also dropped into the text. That term dropped into is a technical term that means that they appear inside the text and without any title. They appear not on a separate page, the way that the illustrations in the monthly serials appear, but in the following the paragraph in which the scene is described. So they're inside the text in a different way and more closely tied to the text. So this illustration would have been placed inside the letterpress, that is the printed text, at the point where Nell is described as being asleep. So,
John, may I ask you a question?
Please.
When the illustrations are dropped in, does text go around them, or are they in their own space?
Text goes around them. So these might appear at the bottom of a page, but they would appear in connection with a passage that has immediately preceded them. So sometimes they're in the middle of the page, sometimes they're in the top of the page, but they're not on a separate page.
I understand that, but is the text literally surrounding them?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, the text is surrounding them. They are inserted into or dropped into the text. So Ava, can you just go forward and I'll point out a few things. So this is the first appearance of Swiveller with Fred Trent. And Swiveller is one of the devices that the novel will use to give unity to the end of the novel. And Swiveller is a kind of comic character of the sort that Dickens had used in other novels. He's a joker. He's fond of taking a drink. His posture is that there's a strong contrast here between his posture. His hat is never on straight. His legs are often askew. They're contrasted here with Fred Trent, who's in the more aggressive and gentlemanly posture. One of the ways you can tell a gentleman in Victorian illustrations is the tight pants that they wear. They wear pants that show off their legs. And Swiveller's body posture is a swivel rather than a, if you look closely, you can see that there's a fourth figure in the background, and that's Master Humphrey. So let's just keep going, Ava. This is Mrs. Jinwin, Quilp's wife's mother, his mother-in-law, and this is Quilp's entrance. And Quilp is often on the margins of the illustrations, and with his typical leering, his crooked legs, and his distorted facial figures as well. And Mrs. Quilp has an angelic face, an oval face, which is the ideal facial configuration for a young woman of good character in a Dickens novel, in contrast to the other ladies at the tea party. So keep going, Ava. Quilp again, and Mrs. Quilp, Quilp smoking and drinking. Next picture. This is the first picture by Cattermole. Cattermole does mostly architectural scenes, and this, of course, is Tom Scott, the tumbling boy, who is one of the characters who appears at the everybody wrap up to the novel. And one of the things to point out is that all of these illustrations are signed, and down in the lower left-hand corner on that object with the wheels, you can see Cattermole's signature. It's a circle form with G and C kind of intertwined. And there, later on, we'll see the Pablo Brown signature on the illustrations that he does. So go ahead, Ava. I'm looking for the signature, and I don't always find them in these illustrations. But go on to the next one. This is a Pablo Brown. Again, Dick and Trent, and the body postures and the alcohol, of course, are the attributes that define them. Go on to the next one.
John, it was
Yes.
on the stool in the last one.
On the stool in the last one.
Yes.
Okay. Go back to the one on the stool. Yeah.
One back.
One back.
Right on the very right-hand side on the stool.
Yes, this is HBK, Pablo Brown Knight. Tableau night brown. Yes, so it's fun to find these. Go on to the next one. And this one is down here. Christian points out that the little girl is with her foot is pointing toward HB down here in the bottom. So go on to the next one. I'm going rapidly through these because we don't have a lot of time left. This is also a brown illustration. I'm not sure it is. Anyway, you get the point. And this is I'm just going to scroll because we're almost at the end of our time. Scroll quickly through these. So next, Kit and the baby and Kit's mother. Next, the introduction of Samson Brass. This is one of the more allegorical illustrations. This is the beginning of the, as the title that was given to it suggests, the allegorical journey, the pilgrimage, and Pilgrim's Progress is, of course, one of the texts that is mentioned inside the novel. So yes, the next one. Swiveller fighting with Quilp in the streets. This is an anticipation of the role that Swiveller and the Marchioness will have in saving Quilp and saving Kit from Quilp's plan to incriminate him. So the next one, the pony at last. Mr. Chuckster on the far left, the Abel Garland and young Abel wearing identical hats and with identical profiles and faces that are similar. Young Abel Garland being a miniature version of his father. Kit tugging his forelock. And next, this is one of the more famous illustrations from Curiosity Shop. Grandfather and Nell looking back on London with the dome of St. Paul's, and one of the structures of the novel is the city versus the country, and it's dramatized in this two-part illustration. Next illustration. So the strolling players is the element of popular culture in which I think the novel as a whole needs to be situated. The next one, this is when they stop at the Jolly Sandboys Inn. Next one, the giants and the dwarves. Again, popular culture. The Old Curiosity Shop loving its opportunities, taking advantage of every opportunity to participate in and demonstrate its connection to the forms of popular entertainment. Next. Grandfather and Nell. This is as close as the novel gets to that scary scene where grandfather comes in to take Nell's money. And Nell is worried that it will happen again. Next slide. I apologize for having to dash through these, and it is 3 o'clock. Quilp, notice the city in the background, the industrial city, and Quilp's sadistic relationship to the dog. in contrast to the pony. I think the dogs and pony are visual juxtapositions. Yes, keep going, Ava. The kitchen at Abel Cottage, the beginning of the Kit and Barbara romance plot, the marriage plot with the lower class characters. And this will contrast with the kitchen at the Brass establishment. So keep going. Again, Swiveller versus Quilp, something that will resolve later on. Keep going. The schoolmaster. This is something, one claim that is made is that the death of the little schoolboy, the favorite pupil of the schoolmaster, is one of the points where Nell's death becomes most inevitable. Now, there are other childhood deaths in the novel. Keep going, Ava. The school scene with Nell over on the right side. Keep going. Yes. Mrs. Jarley. And Mrs. Jarley, I think, is one of the positive figures in Nell's journey. Next, Quilp always appears in the background to scenes. The waxworks, again, you could see the waxworks as a model for the novel as a whole, I think. Next, the waxworks with Nell helping in the publicity, and next to her, the brigand, as he's called, who's trotted out to entice people to enter the waxworks show. The next one, the grandfather as a gambler being taken and Nell observing from the side. Next, Miss Monflather's school, all the girls in profile for the most part, and angelic Nell at the beginning with her toe forward in her characteristic ballet pose. Next, the Jarley establishment again. Next, the Brasses with Quilp intruding in the background. Next, the appearance of the single gentleman renting a room at the Brasses, and his introduction is one place where the story is trying to figure out ways to become more unified by introducing a character who's mysterious and whose identity will be revealed later in the plot. Go next. Banging on the door to rouse the single gentleman from sleep, the Brasses, and then Dick banging on the door, standing on the stool. Next, the introduction of the Marchioness, not yet under that name, and Dick peeking in from the outside. And one of the things that will be revealed, that is revealed in the manuscript, but not in the text that we read, is that Sally Brass is the mother of the Marchioness, and Quilp is the father. Codlin and Short, the Punch and Judy show people with the single gentleman, revealing some clues that will tell the single gentleman where to search for Nell. Next, Jerry of the Dancing Dogs, and you can see Nell and grandfather in the background with Mrs. Jarley's wagon. Next. Swiveller moistening his clay. Next. This is Astley's, the mothers with Kit and Barbara and little Jacob and the baby. And a little pastoral scene of Mr. Garland's cottage. The mothers going out in search of Nell. And of course, they don't get there in time to find her. Next. We talked about this illustration once before. This is seen from Nell's perspective. Nell is not in the picture, but she's the one who sees these characters. So she's outside the picture looking in. Next. The canal boat. Another means of transportation. The man at the with the furnace looking into the fire. Next. The mob, suggestive of the Chartist uprising, and a reminder that the 1840s are a time of social and political unrest. One of the scenes that foreshadows Nell's death, she has fainted. A Cattermole picture of the, not the church, but the building next to the church where Nell will, single gentleman getting lodging at the inn, Quilp peeking in from the left, Brass, and Quilp peeking in. This is the announcement of Quilp's death. It's a comic scene because, of course, he's not dead, but of course he will be. Next, Nell, Mrs. Quilp visiting Quilp's establishment by the river. The fact that Quilp has his summer cottage on the river, of course, it's related to the work that he does. He's both a money lender to grandfather specifically, and what's called a shipbreaker. That is, he takes apart the wrecked structures of ships and sells them or uses them for other purposes, such as next. This is the uncomfortable scene in the rainy summer house by the river. You can see the river in the background. Next. Cattermole. This is Nell's arrival at the church where she will take up residence, or the building next to the church. Next. Nell meditating and in the church with a book of prayers probably in her hand, and the recumbent statues of medieval figures that are entombed inside the church. Next. The bachelor looking at Nell and grandfather, who are tending to the graves. Nell is always attracted to grave sites, and we know why. Next. This is the one illustration by Daniel MacLeese, and this is the sexton pointing down to the well. And Nell is, it's increasingly obvious that death is what is awaiting Nell. Next. Kit, Swiveller, and Chuckster. Next. The Marchioness and Dick. And this is an interesting illustration because it's a rare image of a single person. There are very few pictures of a single person. And this one is, of course, of Dick. And Dick is musical. Dick is the artist figure as well as the fool figure in the novel. And I think this is the point at which Dick has become the hero of the novel. Next. And if he's the hero, then next we have the villain. And this illustration is, I think, typical of Quilp, who's always intruding himself from the side through, in this case, a window. Next, Kit in jail, the turnkey reading the newspaper. Next, visited by the mothers. This is what a shipbreaker can do. He's bought the figurehead off of a ship and is using it as a kind of substitute for Kit and taking out his violent hatred of Kit on this figure. Next, again, the newspaper in the background, and Swiveller to the rescue. The Marchioness learning to play. Play is important because this is a novel that has play, a lot of play and playfulness in it. Learning to play cribbage. Next. A rescue scene, the pony, our favorite character in the novel. And the Marchioness is the instrument of rescue because she's been eavesdropping at the top of the stairs in the kitchen. Next. Swiveller sends food to Dick, food being in when Dick is sick. Next, the exposure of the brass contingent by Witherden, the notary. Next, Quilp's death. You almost have to search to find Quilp's body in the middle, and his bandy legs are one of the things that gives him away. Next, our favorite character again, the pony, and in many scenes of lovemaking in Victorian fiction and Victorian painting, the affection is displaced from the object of affection onto a nearby animal. So here Kit is playing with the pony. The travelers leave on the final search journey to rescue Nell. Next, the destination, Kit approaching the window. Next, and echoing the Samuel Williams illustration of Nell asleep at the beginning of the novel, Nell and her final point of rest. Next, grandfather mourning at the grave. Next, and the spirit's flight, the angelic ascension of Nell. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone had seen a complete set of the illustrations. And I'm sorry I've taken you 15 minutes past our stopping time, but this concludes our discussion of Old Curiosity Shop. I want to thank everyone who participated. I thought this was a particularly good discussion, and I'm grateful to Wayne for his suggesting that we read in connection with the Old Curiosity Shop the book that we will be looking at for the next 2 months, which is George Eliot, Silas Marner. So you'll be getting a message from Courtney about the section and chapter numbers for that novel. The first session will be led by Professor Nancy Henry from the University of Tennessee, and Wayne will lead the final of our 2 sessions on Silas Marner. So thanks to everyone. Goodbye. See you next month.
Thank you.
Happy reading, and remember the pony.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.